Welcome, friends, to another installment of Know Before You Go, a program of the province of St. Albert the Great to prepare you for the readings for this weekend. My name is Father Andrew Carl Wisdom, Vicar for Mission Advancement. And before we begin, I'm aware that it's less than a week toward Lent. I'd like to share with you a wonderful resource that I've so enjoyed collaborating with my Dominican brothers. It's called Growing in Friendship with God, Discovering the Joy of Lent. It's a series of reflections by my brothers, sharing their scholarship, their pastoral insights for each day of Lent. Upon their reflections, I offer a prayer, a hint of how to get started for your day, and an action step, all of which is to help your Lent hopefully come alive and be more meaningful and achieve its goal, growing in friendship with God. If you would like a copy, you can find it at our website, opcentral.org, right under the area called New and Noteworthy. I think you'll enjoy it. As we reflect upon our readings this weekend, I am struck by that old saying we always throw around kind of humorously. Cleanliness is next to godliness. It's kind of a humorous aside when we want to nudge someone toward taking care of perhaps some issues in their life. But in truth, our biblical ancestors, it was for them not humorous, but deadly serious. In fact, it could make or break their spiritual status with their friends, their community, with the temple crowd. Today in the readings, Jesus offers us a whole new way of handling what could be fearful contact with the other, with those that consciously or unconsciously we've pushed out of the bounds of our friendship because we're frightened of them, they're different, we don't know them, or out of sin and pride, we're making ourselves more superior. The predominant image today is that of the leper. The leper in Jesus' time encountered him by breaking Mosaic law, approaching a clean person. And Jesus himself is a lawbreaker because he, a clean person, touched an unclean person. But in that moment, they transcended any rules or laws. One out of faith saw his Savior. The other, out of love, saw a creature of his Father's making and his brother, made by God. It's a powerful image for us to take with us this weekend as we look at those readings and try to begin to understand in our own lives, where have we stepped back fearful of the other? Now, certainly today, when we hear in that first reading that the leper, by the law of Leviticus, has to say, unclean, unclean, every time he approaches a crowd of people, anyone in the streets, to avoid contact. We hear that differently. With the parallels with the pandemic, we get a whole new understanding of what those lepers went through. We understand what it means to have a mysterious and frightening disease. For us, it's hidden, it's respiratory. But still, what do we say instead of unclean and clean? We say, stay back 6 feet, please, for your own protection and mine. As Dr. Fauci's told us many times, we have to act as though we are infected. It's frightening, it's disturbing. And for that time, too, it was frightening and disturbing. And it was also isolating, as we understand, painfully so, for them as us. They were cast out of the community. They had to be in separate camps. And haven't we seen the pain of that with this pandemic? The hand on the window of the nursing home, the Zoom call with grandparents wanting to reach out and touch the grandchildren and not being able to. No, this is not another world. This is the world we're living in now. The question is, how do we respond? Do we keep the other, Or do we, even in the limitations of this frightening moment, reach out as Jesus did, and within the bounds that we're capable of, touch another through our word, through our action? Before we do that, we have to get over our own fear. We have to deal with our own need for healing. The psalmist's prayer is particularly poignant. The psalmist says, "O Lord, I am troubled. Help me not to be troubled. Let me turn in time of trouble to you, that you can fill me with the joy of salvation. I acknowledge my sin to you, my guilt I acknowledge before you." You see, unfortunately, so often, the image that we're left with, the assumptions that we deal with, not only then but now, is that somehow sickness equals sin. And it can when it's self-afflicted, but sometimes the circumstances of life, as we see today, provide that situation, provide our fate. But that's not always completely understood. Health and holiness seem to go together. Commentators have said that just as we wouldn't separate the words body, blood, and soul, those concepts somehow go together. So how do you separate obedience, cleanliness, and holiness? Back in biblical times, they went together. And one could see as a punishment that that disease that affected someone, their sickness, was somehow their fault or the fault of their family. And in a strange way, I got a glimpse of this when our house, our priory, first got coronavirus. And at first people called, very compassionate, but it wasn't long before there was a little bit of a tone in their voice. And they would say, "Well, Andrew, Carl, how did you get this?" "Well, don't you know how you get this?" "Well, where were you? Were you wearing a mask?" And all of a sudden I began to feel, did I do something wrong? And I began to feel certainly what those lepers must have felt, somehow responsible for what had happened. This is what we do to others when they are sick or different or the other. We can make them into something else. We can exclude them. Leper in its day was not a diagnostic term. It was a derogatory term. It was the same as calling someone a leper would be say, "Oh, that's an illegal, that's an alien." You see how much we think we've left the past behind, but we really haven't? And that's why the scriptures come alive for us each week, and that's why we go to hear the word, so that as Paul instructs us, we can imitate Christ consciously and intentionally, and not unconsciously drift into ways of behaving that are not Christian at all. And we see plenty of examples of that today. The question is, are we going to let God heal us today? So receiving that joy of salvation ourselves, we can let God heal others through us as well. Maybe that's a good focus to take into Lent. May God bless you, and a happy and joyful Lent.